Good afternoon. My name is Jessie Herman. I am the Director of Programs and Community Outreach with the World Affairs Council of Charlotte, and I help run the Magellan Society, which is our young professionals group. We are delighted to have you joining us today. I know we have students and adults from lots of colleges, including UNC Charlotte, Chapel Hill, Queens, Davidson, Wingate, and a few others, so we are delighted to have you with us today. We've had a variety of TMS events recently. So for our young professionals, we have lots of different ways for you to engage, whether it's been a documentary screening, international cocktail hours, an international career panel, and next month we'll be having a samba dance workshop with the North Carolina Brazilian Arts Project. So make sure to keep an eye on your email and we'll have a great time and we'll keep your camera off. So for the layout of this program, I'm going to give you a quick biography of Kathryn Crockart. We're going to turn it over to her for the presentation, and then we will have about 30 minutes afterwards for Q&A. For Q&A, you are welcome to submit your questions either in the chat box on the right-hand side of the Zoom webinar feature, or if you hover your mouse over the screen, there will be a toolbar on the bottom, and you can use the Q&A box there. We'll be answering and going through both of those, and you can submit questions at any time. So Kathryn Crockart is a career member of the Senior Foreign Service, currently serving as the Diplomat in Residence for the Mid-Atlantic region, which includes North Carolina, South Carolina, and most of Virginia. As a DIR, she helps diverse cross-sections of Americans who want to serve and represent our country to pursue career opportunities with the U.S. Department of State. Mrs. Crockart returned to the United States in August 2018 from her most recent overseas assignment at the U.S. Embassy in Islamabad, Pakistan, in 2017 to 2018, where she served as the Minister Counselor for Public Affairs. In this role, she led American public diplomacy efforts in Pakistan through robust outreach, exchanges, and media engagement conducted by the embassy and 3 consulates. She is a public diplomacy coned foreign service officer, and if you don't know what that means, give it a minute, she'll cover it in her presentation. And her other assignments include the U.S. Embassy in London from 2014 to 17, where she was the spokesperson and director of the press office. She served as principal officer in the U.S. Consulate in Medan, Indonesia from 2011 to 2014, leading all American diplomatic efforts on the island of Sumatra. She has also served in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, Belize City, Belize, and both Frankfurt and Munich, Germany. The State Department has recognized Mrs. Crockart with its individual Superior and Meritorious Honor Awards 4 times each. Prior to joining the State Department in 1999, she worked at the Herald Sun in her home state of North Carolina. She received her BA with honors from UNC Chapel Hill, which we will forgive, and she speaks German, Indonesian, Malay, and has studied French. So Kathryn, how do I become a US diplomat?
Hi, Jessie. All right, hopefully my video is loading. Thank you for that introduction, and thanks to all of you for joining us here this afternoon. I wish we could do it in person, but I've been really impressed with all of the virtual programming that the World Affairs Council of Charlotte is doing, and I'm delighted to be back with you all for an in-depth presentation on becoming a foreign service officer. You've heard a lot about my career, but I want to maybe flesh out a little bit what happened to me before I joined the Foreign Service, because as Jessie mentioned, I'm originally from North Carolina. I grew up in Greensboro and kind of didn't have an opportunity to travel a lot growing up. I traveled a lot domestically, but not so often internationally. And I was hugely curious about the world around me. But I will say it never occurred to me to become a diplomat, to join the Foreign Service, until I went to a talk given by one of my predecessors about 25 years ago, the person who was the diplomat in residence here in North Carolina at the time. We, in our capacity as diplomats in residence, are really here to help open pathways into the Foreign Service for those of you who are interested in a global career. So I went to his talk as an undergraduate at UNC Chapel Hill, go Heels, and was immediately captivated. He described his career, the kinds of experiences he had had, the personal and professional growth that his career had led to, and I knew that this was something that I wanted to do. And then he extremely helpfully demystified the process for all of us who came to his talk that day, helping us understand what it is to apply to become a diplomat, why there are these various phases of assessment the State Department puts its candidates through, and how to navigate that successfully. So I took copious notes and I took the first step, which was registering for a multiple choice test called the Foreign Service Officer Test. That was back in 1998. And almost exactly a year later, I was walking into our National Foreign Affairs Training Center in Arlington, Virginia on my first day of paid employment as a U.S. Foreign Service officer. It has been the most incredible experience. I've had, as you've heard, experiences all around the world and domestically here in the United States. And it's my hope at this point in my career to be able to give back and help all of you access this type of employment as well. So today's talk is going to be principally about navigating our application process. As a diplomat in residence, I'm also able to answer a whole host of questions about various career opportunities across the State Department. So today's conversation is going to be focused on our Foreign Service Officer or Foreign Service Generalist process. There are other types of employment at the State Department. So you should know that we have specialist opportunities for people with specific skills. If you are a teacher of English as a foreign language, if you have fluency in certain foreign languages like Spanish, Portuguese, Mandarin Chinese, or Arabic, we have different opportunities for you. If you have a background in information technology or computer science, or if you're an engineer or an architect, if you're in the medical field, whether as a nurse practitioner, physician's assistant, doctor, or psychiatrist, we have foreign service careers for people from all of those types of backgrounds. We aren't going to be focusing on applications for our specialist careers today, nor will we focus on things like our civil service opportunities. Those are the domestically based careers, mostly in the Washington, D.C. area that the State Department has. And we also won't be focusing on internships. But the State Department has all of those opportunities, and I would be more than happy to answer questions, time permitting, during the Q&A about some of those other opportunities if you have them. What we'll go through in the slides today is a really in-depth discussion of our Foreign Service Officer test process, which is your application to become a diplomat, what to expect through that process, how to access it, and how to prepare yourself, a few tips and tricks. And then we'll have hopefully a really open and far-reaching Q&A session. So please go ahead and submit those questions, and hopefully Jesse will help me out when we get finished with the slides to answer all the questions that you have today. So what we'll do, I'm going to, if you'll bear with me with the technology, I'm going to share the presentation with you a little bit, and we'll go ahead and get started. Okay. All right, so hopefully you're all now seeing a little picture of one of our diplomats in action. If not, Jesse, please let me know. We'll just continue on from here, though. I want to start with a little bit of a workflow, a process chart of what our application is like. You heard me mention that when I was a candidate, the diplomat in resident helped to demystify this process. And this slide helps you to understand why that feels like it's necessary. If you haven't looked at careers.state.gov, which is our URL there at the bottom of the page, and you haven't read about our assessment process, you might not realize the different steps you'll be taking and how to get ready for each of those discrete steps. We'll talk about that here today. This slide is more complicated than the actual process is, but there are some steps that take place behind the scenes that you should be aware of as a candidate looking to become a diplomat. So this does include those. For the purposes of today's talk, we're really going to focus on the first two circles in this process. The Foreign Service Officer test in the red circle, and the light blue qualifications evaluation panel process. Those are the first two out of the three assessment phases to become a Foreign Service Officer. Everything that comes after the oral assessment, which is our third and final assessment phase, that's sort of back-end processing. The way our process works is you apply to become a diplomat by registering to take the Foreign Service Officer test. If you pass the Foreign Service Officer test, your application will be forwarded to our Qualifications evaluation panel for review, and we'll talk about each of these stages in depth today. The candidates who are successful at the QEP process will be invited to come to the oral assessment, which is our version of an interview. It's a very structured interview process. And it's something that if you're invited, you'll want to be prepared for, but we're not going to talk about it today because you'll have ample time between the QEP and the oral assessment itself to get ready. And we have lots of additional tools that we provide to successful QEP candidates to get ready for the oral assessment. So don't worry that we're not going to focus on the oral assessment here today. Know that there are going to be lots of resources coming your way when you get to that point in our application process so that you are best prepared for the oral assessment as well. At the end of the day, at the oral assessment, the end of your interview, if you're successful, you'll be offered a conditional job as a Foreign Service officer. You'll be brought into a room and told congratulations and welcome to the Foreign Service. That's what you want to hear. That's what we all want you to hear. At that point, you do have a job offer. Conditional is the operative word there because it is conditional on security clearances at the top secret level and a medical clearance for worldwide availability, which essentially means that we want to make sure that you don't have any conditions that we wouldn't be able to treat anywhere in the world. Again, I'm happy to answer any questions about this sort of back-end processing if you have questions about those today. The very last couple of steps, again, administrative, those happen on our end and you don't have to take any action, are a suitability review panel. We take one last look at your whole file, and then we put our candidates onto what we call our career track register. And we're going to talk about the career tracks in just a second, meaning that this is our list of eligible hires. You've got your clearance, you've passed all the phases of assessment, and now we're just waiting for an orientation class for you. When we start a new orientation class, which is typically several times a year, depending on our hiring needs, congressional budget allocations, and other factors, we hire from the career track register. So this gives you a little insight into the lingo and the full process. But in order to start, just focus on those first two bubbles. And that's what we're going to talk about today. This process shouldn't feel overwhelming despite the number of bubbles. And so it's easier if you break it down into some discrete steps. So what do you start with? Before you actually register for the Foreign Service Officer test, the very first decision you have to make in your diplomatic career is which of our 5 career tracks you would like to select. What type of diplomat do you want to be? And there are 5 options for this. In addition to all those other careers I mentioned earlier that are available, to become a Foreign Service officer, you will have to select one of these 5 career tracks: management, consular, public diplomacy, political, or economic. There's a host of information on careers.state.gov about all 5 of these, and I would encourage you to take a look at that information. There are videos on our YouTube channel of officers from each of these career tracks talking about the type of work that they do. So really take a look at those to make the decision that's best for you. You do not have to select the career track that most closely tracks with your past experience. So let's say you have a degree in economics and you've been working in finance or as an economist. You don't necessarily have to become an economic officer if you don't want to. We hire you for personality traits and dimensions of your character, and then we will give you the on-the-job training. But obviously, if you want to bring those skills into the job, you're more than welcome to do that. Additional ways to select the right career track for you: give me a call. After today's session, you'll hopefully all be, well, my email address is there on the slide, so you can send me an email at any time and we can schedule a phone call. And then you'll also be given in the chat box or in the comment box a tiny URL, which you are more than welcome to use to sign up, and then I'll email you at some point later this week with a whole bunch of information, as well as my phone number and other contact information so that we can follow up. Very briefly, the 5 career tracks. Management, it is what it says on the label. Our management officers serve as the chief operating officers of our embassies and consulates overseas and of our headquarters in Washington. We could not be effective at practicing diplomacy without our management officers, who make sure that our facilities represent the United States well all around the world. They oversee a number of different discrete aspects of our operations, everything from human resources to finance to our medical care, to our security, to our community outreach. And so our management officers do have an opportunity to really stretch themselves in a lot of different directions. They work with very diverse staffs all around the world. Overseas, the majority of our workforce is non-US citizens, and so diversity is a key component of who we are and our institutional culture. And as a management officer, you get to unite a really diverse workforce behind a common set of goals in each mission that you'll work in. You'll also be responsible for a large and significant public trust resources. So this is something to consider as well. If you have a background in any type of leadership or management capacity, you'll be well suited for this. But again, you don't have to have that background. If it interests you, we'll give you the training. I want to spend a minute speaking about the consular career track as well, because this is, of the 5, probably the least well understood option for incoming foreign service generalists. Consular officer, and I certainly did not know what the consular career track was all about when I first took the foreign service officer test. But consular officers are very often the face of our embassy to publics all around the world. They do 2 core functions of our diplomatic work. And those are taking care of the interests of American citizens around the world and handling our visa processing all around the world. I'll talk about both of those just very briefly. American citizen services, hugely important and can be very high profile work. This ranges from kind of everyday responsibilities such as issuing US passports for people who need them overseas, registering the births and deaths of American citizens abroad. But these cases can also be very challenging and sometimes very sensitive. You imagine cases of international child abduction where you have an American citizen parent and a non-American citizen parent, and a child who gets stuck in the breakup of that international relationship, and maybe the non-American citizen parent takes that child abroad in contravention of a court order. You can imagine the challenge there, because you have a legal responsibility to do what's right, and then you also have a child who's stuck in the middle of an oftentimes very traumatic circumstance. And so our consular officers have to handle their work with sensitivity and an awareness that lives really are affected by doing their jobs right. And then the other half of that consular work, as I mentioned, is managing our visa processes overseas. So lots of people back in the States think that Department of Homeland Security has the monopoly on who comes and goes from the United States. That's certainly not strictly true. The very first step in deciding who from around the world can visit the United States is deciding who gets a visa to apply for entry into the US. And that is a diplomatic function that rests with consular officers of the US Department of State. So very important, as you can imagine, again, very high stakes. In some cases, consular officers get to meet everyone in a country who is interested in engaging with the United States. From the students who want to come and study at universities like the ones that some of you attend, to people who want to invest in businesses, entrepreneurs who are looking to expand their investment into the United States, celebrities and performing artists who want to come here and have a concert or an exhibit, share their talents, tourists who just want to visit their cousin in Nebraska or Disney World. Consular officers are seeing all of those people and determining who meets the requirements in the law to come into the United States. So really, really important work. And I did 3 years of consular work at the beginning of my career and loved every minute of it. So I'm happy to answer specific questions about that if it's something that you think might be interesting, even if you've never considered it before. The last 3 are maybe more traditional diplomacy, especially the final 2. Public diplomacy is my career track, or my cone, as Jessie mentioned when she was sharing my bio with you all. Public diplomacy is the front-facing communications aspect of our diplomatic mission abroad. So we do all of the media relations of the US government overseas. That's dealing with journalists from traditional print and broadcast media. And then increasingly social properties. So we handle Facebook feeds, Twitter feeds, in some cases, Snapchat, Instagram. We're kind of doing it all. And that's a big growth industry for us, as it is for a lot of other entities as well. And then the second side of public diplomacy is our cultural engagement, helping to support the implementation of our foreign policy objectives through enhanced mutual understanding. The foundation of this really is exchange programs. We spend a lot of time talent scouting all around the world for people, whether they're in high school or at a mid-career level, who are going to be leaders in their communities in the future. And we invite those individuals to come to the United States for really in-depth experiences designed to create relationships here in the United States for those folks that they can take back home with them. Our hope is that those relationships will continue to grow over time, and that the United States will continue to be a source of inspiration, and that there'll be exchange on both sides. So we do lots of exchange programs around the world, but we also use American soft power tools to help start conversations about sometimes quite difficult topics. So that could be things like American film, music, performing arts. We use expert speakers from all sectors of U.S. society. We invite them to come around the world and talk about issues that are relevant to the communities where we work. And so we're trying to foster that mutual understanding and that exchange of ideas that can help countries and communities make positive decisions moving forward. So that's public diplomacy. And then political and economic career tracks operate very similarly on two separate portfolios. So whether you're a political or an economic officer, you're going to be thinking about policy. And that's true whether you're overseas or back in the United States. You're going to be helping to implement U.S. foreign policy overseas. So that means that you'll be going into the foreign office of a government in the country to which you've been assigned and working to build consensus and persuade your partners or interlocutors there to join us on whatever our policy objective may be. And then you'll be going back to the embassy after those meetings and, very importantly, writing and recording what you heard from our host nation counterparts. Policy in Washington depends on that flow of information, and so if our political and economic officers are not sharing what they heard and their analysis of what they heard, then the policy making process, which takes place in Washington, is not going to be as effective. And political and economic officers who go back to Washington are reading all of those reports from all around the world, synthesizing them down into the most critical points for our policy making and recommending policy positions to the Secretary of State and to the President of the United States, who ultimately sets our foreign policy. Once the policy decisions are made, they come back to the Department of State for implementation, and so that cycle continues. So as I said, you have to select one of these 5 career tracks as the very first decision you make. Before you even take the FSOT, you will be checking one of these boxes when you register for the Foreign Service Officer test. So it's an important decision. There are a couple of reasons I don't want you to panic too much about this. One is because as a generalist, as a Foreign Service officer, we expect you to have a certain amount of varied experience during your career. So you heard me say that I spent 3 years at the beginning of my career as a consular officer. I was not a consular coned officer, but I did consular work. And that's very, very common. In fact, almost all of our new diplomats will spend some time doing consular work at the start of their career. But during the course of your career, you have the opportunity to expand your skill sets, usually in all 5 of these areas. If you stay in the State Department for 20 or 30 years, you'll keep coming back to the one that you chose, though. So it's an important decision, but not one that means that you'll never have any exposure to any of the other 4 areas that you did not choose. My own career, as I said, 3 years at the beginning as a consular officer. I did a political tour in Belize where I was writing the State Department's Human Rights Report, International Religious Freedom Report, Trafficking in Persons Report. From there, I went into a public diplomacy tour in Malaysia, followed by a second public diplomacy tour in Germany, in Munich. From Munich, I went to Indonesia, where I was the principal officer, which is the leadership role at a consulate level. So I was doing all of these things in that role, but primarily managing a post and managing the implementation of our foreign policy in that part of Indonesia. And from there, I went back to public diplomacy for a couple of tours in London and in Islamabad. And now as a recruiter, I'm squarely back in that management lane again. So you can see that even though I'm a public diplomacy officer, I've had varied experiences. And the further you get into your career, the same will be true for you. And that's by design. We want you to be able to be competent in multiple aspects of diplomatic work because we want you to become a deputy ambassador, what we call a deputy chief of mission, or an ambassador, or a deputy assistant secretary of state at the senior level of your career. And at that point, you'll need to be proficient in multiple components of our diplomatic work. You don't want to be stovepiped in one way. I think there was a question about, can you ever change your cone? And the answer to that is yes, it's technically possible, but it isn't the easiest thing in the world to do. I've been in the Foreign Service for 21 and a half years now, counting, I guess. I know personally 2 or 3 people who've successfully done this. So there's a bureaucratic process to change your career track or change your cone. It isn't commonly used, and it isn't a guarantee. So you do really want to think carefully about which one of these that you choose. I'm a resource, as I mentioned, for you. There are other resources out there. We have a mobile app called DOS Careers. There'll be a slide about that later. But that has on it sort of a personality quiz type engagement where you can answer some questions that will let you know which of these 5 career tracks might best use your skills. I always recommend against making major life decisions on the results of a personality quiz, but it's a tool. It's a tool to get you thinking, and you're more than welcome if something comes up in that process that surprises you to reach out to me, and we can talk a little bit more about what the career trajectory would look like for, say, an economic officer or a management officer, or whatever it is you'd like to talk about. Okay, moving on. The next thing that you'll need to really pay attention to before you take the test itself is our personal narratives. So you saw those 2 first circles. One was the FSOT, the Foreign Service Officer Test, and the second one was the QEP, the Qualification Evaluation Panel. Those are 2 distinct parts of our process, but for you, they'll kind of bleed into one another. So what you need to understand is that part of your registration process involves writing personal narratives, which won't be looked at until you get to the QEP stage. And there'll be a couple of other things that we'll talk about that we look at in the QEP stage, but this is the most important part of that early on. So you'll be asked when you register for the FSOT to submit 6, sorry, I only have 5 here, there's a 6th one. 6 personal, there's a 6th one here that's not on my list, it got cut off somehow, interpersonal skills. But 6 short narratives, and they're quite short, they're limited by character count to about 1,400 characters, where you write about yourself, experiences that you've had using these different skill sets, and in ways that hopefully impacted a situation for the better, in ways that are relevant to the career track that you have chosen. A lot of people, when they're writing as part of their Foreign Service assessment, don't pay close attention to the writing samples that they're submitting, and that is a huge error in an application process, because writing is one of the most important skills a Foreign Service officer can have, and we take a very close look at the writing samples that you submit throughout your assessment process, and this is the very first one. In addition to that, the personal narratives are also the only chance that you will have to tell us about you until we meet you at the final stage, at the oral assessment. And so these narratives are your chance to tell us in your own words why you should be the next diplomat that we hire. They're extremely important. The good news is that the personal narratives are not proctored, and they're not timed. So once you see the prompts, which are, as I said, key to these 5 areas, and then the 6th one, which is not on the slide, interpersonal skills. Once you see those prompts are out there, you can start drafting. You know what the character count is. It's in our candidate preparation guide, and you can fine-tune these between now and when you actually click send on your Foreign Service application. You can show them to people. There's no prohibition on sharing those samples with mentors, people who know an awful lot about governance, leadership, foreign affairs, and then people who know nothing at all about those things. You want to make sure that whatever your message is, whatever it is you're trying to convey, comes through in a crystal clear and compelling way to any reader of those narratives, and you really want to spend some time on these. The biggest mistake you can make in actually filling out the application for the FSOT is just typing something quickly into these narrative boxes, hitting send, and forgetting all about it. Focus on these. Recognizing that we won't be reading them and scoring them until later in the process. Okay. So this is all part of your registration for the FSOT. And if you know about the Foreign Service, you may also already know that we offer the FSOT typically 3 times a year. Our usual schedule, and this has definitely morphed some this year, our usual schedule is to offer the test in February, June, and October, with the registration period usually running for the 4 weeks prior to the test. So you can register all through January for the February test, all through May for the June test, and so on. Because of the public health situation right now, we have postponed this year's June test. It will be taking place in July, subject to local conditions. So we are hoping that the FSOT will be able to be offered in as many parts of the country as possible, but our contractor, Pearson VUE, will be working with us to make the decisions that are in the best interest of our candidates. So keep an eye on this through careers.state.gov and the Pearson VUE FSOT website. But as of now, we are intending to offer the test in July with registration in June. So you want to keep an eye on careers.state.gov if you're looking at that test. And if you're thinking further afield, October, February, June, those are the successive months year on year that we offer the test. You register through careers.state.gov. The link will take you to our contractor website, Pearson VUE, and then you'll be inputting essentially a resume of your background at this point. And it's here in the slide, but I just want to underscore, this is your job application. So there's no other form that you'll fill out telling us who you are while we're assessing you. So you really want to make sure that this is complete and that you're paying close attention to what you need to input here. I should also note that while typically the FSOT is given overseas, it will not be offered overseas this July due to the public health situation. So if you are tuning in from abroad, please understand that we're making the best decisions we can for candidates at this time, and we hope to reopen the typical FSOT as soon as it's possible to do so. But we will be planning to offer it in July at as many locations as we can. And then you actually have to go and take the test. So what is that like? Some of you who are with us today may have taken it before. There have been some changes, although not terribly recently, to the structure of the test. So if you took the test 5 or 10 years ago, you might see some things that are different. But if you took the test last year, a lot of this is going to be familiar. There are 3 multiple choice sections of the FSOT, and then there's an essay. And we'll talk about those each in turn, both with sort of what's covered and then how to best get ready. All right, so job knowledge. When I talk to candidates about the FSOT, about the 3 multiple choice parts of the FSOT, there typically are 2 that people are nervous about. Job knowledge is one, and situational judgment is the other. There's also an English knowledge and expression section of the test, and that typically doesn't worry most candidates, but every candidate is unique and brings his or her own skills to the test. So we'll talk about each one in turn, and then if you have specific questions, toss those into the Q&A. We'll come back to them. So we cover general knowledge on a number of different subject areas. You can see them here on the slide. I give you this because we want to share the information, but I'll tell you what, if I were looking at this slide for the first time, I wouldn't love it because this looks like a lot. And people think, well, okay, how do I go and learn all the things about all the things, right? And that is not what we're asking you to do in the Foreign Service Officer test, but we do want our diplomats who are going to be serving all around the world, representing the United States, to be able to speak knowledgeably about a lot of different aspects of what it is to be an American. And so that is the function and the purpose of this part of the test. And when you take the practice test, which we'll talk about in a little while, you will get a sense of what general knowledge questions mean to us, what level those questions are sort of at. But what you should be expecting when you're trying to prepare for this is a test that is all over the place. You're going to get questions about web literacy. You're going to get questions about economics. You'll get questions about U.S. governance. Read that Constitution. Know your amendments. You'll get questions about being a good manager and a good leader. So this question, when you think about what those 5 career tracks are, you can understand why. We ask so many different questions of our incoming diplomats, but it's important to know that you're not going to get just questions about economics. If you've chosen the economic cone, everyone takes the same FSOT and everyone gets that same broad spectrum of questions on the job knowledge section of the test. And you'll answer 60 questions in 40 minutes in the timed test. How do you get ready for this? There are a couple of different ways. Recommended reading, these are some sources that you might want to just put on your reading list between now and when you take the test. The most important thing, I think, is be well informed on current events. So this lists The Economist, the Foreign Affairs Journal, the Foreign Policy Journal. These can be really helpful to understand the historical context of our diplomacy and some of the current events that are confronting us in the policy space right now. But if you are reading any reputable news source on a regular basis, you're going to be getting a strong foundation in global events and history that will help you in the test. U.S. Constitution is really important. It's the document that we take an oath to support and defend, and you want to understand how it functions and what it says. These are a couple of the things that you want to think about. But more than sort of crashing on all of those different areas, you'll want to focus your study, and I'll talk in the tips about how to do that for the job knowledge section of the test, because it really is possible with a couple of the resources that we have out there. Okay. This is the mobile app that I mentioned. In addition to that personality quiz I was talking about earlier, the real value for me in the mobile app is that it has hundreds of questions taken from real Foreign Service Officer tests in the past that you can look at. Most of these are across the job knowledge areas that were just on the previous slide. You can set your app up to give you a question a day, sort of like a little trivia question, or you can go through them in a more rote manner. But this is a way to keep the content that you're likely to see fresh in your mind. So hugely valuable, and this app is free. So you guys can all go and download it at your convenience and read through those questions. I'll give you some more tips and tricks a little bit later on, but let's talk about the other two parts of the multiple choice test first. English expression and usage. For those of you who've gone to college and taken an SAT or a GRE, this section of the test is going to look really familiar to you. Looking at correct grammar, spelling, punctuation, you'll be asked to identify the part of the sentence that is grammatically incorrect. So you will have seen a test that looks and functions like this section of the test before, which is why it tends not to make our candidates nervous as they prepare. So let me know if you have any specific questions about that. But again, it will look and feel familiar to you if you've taken any of those types of standardized tests before. And again, this gets back at gauging your ability to express yourself well, and in particular to write well for the Department of State, because writing is so important in what we do day in and day out. And the last part of the multiple choice FSOT is the situational judgment section. This is the newest part of our test. So if you're one of those people who took the test last 5 or 10 years ago, you will not have taken the situational judgment part of the test. It is designed to tease out whether you think like our most successful diplomats think in certain situations. And so what we'll do is give you a set of scenarios. There are 28 of these in about 42 minutes on the test. These scenarios are taken from real diplomatic practice, and we'll give you just a short 2, maybe 3 sentence description of what this hypothetical situation or what this situation was. It's a multiple choice question, each one, and so you'll be given 4 options for actions that you as a Foreign Service officer could take to handle the situation that's presented. We ask each of our candidates to answer each situational judgment question twice. The first time with, what is the best course of action that you can take of the 4 options you've been given? And what the second answer you have to give is the opposite. What is the worst course of action that you as a Foreign Service officer can take? So that is what the situational judgment section is like. And at least for me, I've never taken any type of assessment or test that had a section like this on it. So this is the thing that is most new to most of our candidates. Okay. I'm going to come back to the written essay. I'd like to talk a little bit about how best to prepare for the multiple choice part of the test. Because this to me is the third step. So the first step was choosing your career track. The second step is writing great personal narratives that are grammatically perfect, that have compelling writing, that answer the question that was asked in a way that's relevant to the career track that you've chosen. And then the third step is how to study for this multiple choice test. So the first thing that I recommend that you do, if you haven't done it already, is to go to careers.state.gov and look for our practice FSOT. We offer a sample test online. It's free to take it. And it's actually a real FSOT that we retired from service a couple of years ago and published online in order to give all of our candidates a real idea of both the content and the structure of the test. Structure shouldn't be a surprise because we've talked about it, but you will really get a sense of what level our general knowledge questions are targeting if you take that practice test. There are a lot of things I really love about this in addition to its authenticity. One is that it recreates test-taking conditions. So if you have 28 situational judgment scenarios in 42 minutes on the real FSOT, the practice test on careers.state.gov will give you the same number of questions in the same amount of time with a little counter so that you can, monitor your progress and make sure that you're finishing those questions in time. At the end of the practice test, you will get a fairly detailed readout. So you will get by section your results. You will know how well you did in each of the 3 sections and then what your comprehensive result was. As well as the thing that I think is most valuable from the practice test, you'll get a predictive result for the real FSOT. So our system will tell you, based on how well you did on the practice test, there is a, let's say, 92% chance that you'll pass the real Foreign Service Officer test. And they'll break that down by section. So you might see that you got 99% on job knowledge and 99% on English expression, but like 12% on situational judgment. So this tool is critical in helping you focus your efforts to prepare for the FSOT. Take the practice test now to get that feedback. And then here's what you should do. While you're still in the practice test feedback screen, you can go back and look at the questions you got right and wrong. For me, this is most valuable in 2 places, job knowledge and situational judgment. For job knowledge, it's valuable because that span of subject matter is overwhelming for a lot of candidates. It's not meant to be. It's meant to help us identify people who are ready to represent the U.S. abroad. But when you're trying to study to improve the likelihood that you're going to do well on the FSOT, using the practice test to go back in and target areas that you need to study more in is really helpful. So you could go back and realize that you missed all of the management and leadership questions, but you got everything right for economics and US government. That should be really reassuring to you, right? That you can say, okay, I did really well on a couple of these areas, but now I know there are 1 or 2 or 3 that I need to review, and you can focus your review on those areas. Situational judgment is an area that I find that candidates who reach out to me often do really, really well on, 99% chance that they'll pass it in the real thing, or they don't do really well on it. There seems to be no in between. So if you take the practice test and you do really well on this, great. If you don't despair. Go back in and take a look at the questions again. Compare the answers that you gave to the answers that we were looking for, because we will show you in that practice test what the right answers were, what the wrong answers were. And with situational judgment, which is, it feels like a subjective part of the test, what you can do with that is try to get inside the mind of the successful diplomats that have come before you and understand the way they make decisions. Think more about that. And if you can get inside the head of that successful diplomat, then that should help you when you're taking the real thing. Other ways to prepare. We've already talked about the sample questions on the Careers app. There are lots of private study guides out there that are published by companies that prepare these as part of their business model. The State Department does not write those, and so we don't endorse any particular one. All of them offer sample tests and lots of sample questions and their own sets of tips and tricks, and lots of candidates find those valuable. If you're going to go and use those, the one thing I would really encourage you to do is take a look at the publication dates and make sure that situational judgment is covered. Because as I mentioned, this is the newest part of our testing process. And often people are looking at older guides that have an old part of the test in it that we no longer offer, and you don't want to spend a lot of time and money on those resources and then a third of what you need is missing. So make sure that situational judgment is covered. Okay, so that is the multiple choice part of the test. I will say, you know, it's a computer-based test. What will typically happen is that when you're leaving the testing center, you will get an email sometimes on the way home within an hour or two, at a maximum within 48 hours of taking the test. You will know whether you passed the multiple choice part of the test. So you get almost instantaneous feedback, which is great. And what we want to hear, what you all want to hear, is that you passed it. So then what? You've passed the multiple choice part of the test. What happens next? All of your writing will be forwarded along with the other information you put into your application to our qualifications evaluation panel, and we'll talk about that in a second. And included in the material that is forwarded to them is the written essay that you write as part of the FSOT. So in addition to the 3 multiple choice sections, we will ask you to write an essay on site in the testing center. This is another area that I really encourage you to really get ready for, and there are tips and tricks to do that. The written essay works like this. You won't have the prompts, the questions that you're writing to in advance. Those will be part of the test. So when you get to the written essay part of the test, you will be given a couple of prompts to choose from. You select one, and you'll have 7 minutes to make that decision. At the end of the 7 minutes, a 25-minute timer will begin, and that's your time to write your essay. A couple of sort of observations and tips on this. Like your personal narratives, this is a very important part of the test, even though you won't get feedback on it for weeks because it's gone to the QEP for assessment. So you really want to be prepared for this. 25 minutes is a very short period of time to write a complete essay start to finish. So don't assume that you'll be able to go in and do this effectively without preparation, but you absolutely can drill for this and prepare yourself for success. So here are my tips for success in the essay part of the FSOT. First, you have 7 minutes to choose your prompt. Do not take all 7 minutes to choose your prompt. There are people who ponder this for the whole 7 minutes and still don't select, and you should know that our system will kind of automatically pick one for you if you don't make that selection. So you'll want to make sure you do make the selection. But pick your topic as quickly as you can and use the remainder of your 7 minute time as planning time. You'll have access to scrap paper or a whiteboard in the testing center. Use that remainder of your 7 minutes to sketch out an outline and get ready. Because you want to use every second of your 25 minutes to actually write and draft your prose. Know that when we score your written essay, we are not giving you a grade here on your substantive policy knowledge. So you do not need to go on to state.gov and memorize every policy paper that has been published under this administration. It's a test of your drafting skills. So we want to see great grammar, great syntax, good structure, right? Do you have a strong thesis statement at the top of your essay? Is it supported in 3 or 4 paragraphs with detail? Is there a good conclusion? Are you writing an active voice? Those kinds of things. So how do you get ready for that in advance of the test? First of all, know what the structure will be. That 25-minute timeline is a hard timeline. Second, know how many characters you have. I think it's a 2,800 character limit for this. So again, if you kind of have a sense of how long of an essay 2,800 characters will give you, that's going to help you manage your time and your drafting on test day. And then practice. So let's say you've done the practice multiple choice test and you feel confident, you've got 1 or 2 areas for the job knowledge you're going to study on. What else do you do with the time between now and the test? You practice your written essay. There are sample prompts in some of those commercial materials. There are sample prompts on careers.state.gov. But I often will encourage people to do what I call the 24-hour news network challenge. So pick your news station of choice, whatever it is that you turn to for news. Turn the TV on or the radio on for 2 minutes. And whatever they're talking about, that's the subject that you're going to be writing about. Turn on your computer, set a timer for 25 minutes, and go. And if you do this a couple of times a week ahead of the test, you'll start to get into a rhythm of structuring your essay to a place where you're going to be able to complete it within the allotted time during the FSOT. But make sure you're not going into the test itself without having proven to yourself that you can successfully compose an essay within the time allotted. Writing, again, I'll say it, I've said it already, I'll say it again, it's hugely important in our assessment process, so you want to make sure you're prepared for this. Keep calm is a great tip. I've already talked to you a little bit about the practice multiple choice exam online. If you haven't taken it before, please make time this afternoon, this week, and take that. That will give you a strong sense of whether you're ready to register to take the test in July, or whether you might want to prepare a little bit further before signing up to take the real thing. Because you can only take the FSOT once every 12 months. So if you take the test this July and for whatever reason, don't pursue that application further, you won't be able to take the test again until next June or July. So you want to be as confident as possible that you're going to go in with a good chance of success on that FSOT this summer. Keep up with the reading. I'm trying to think of additional. I think we've covered most of that, but I want to get into the questions, so I'm not going to go on too much further there. I do want to talk to you about how the QEP works. We talked earlier about the personal narratives, that you'll actually submit the personal narratives when you register for the QEP, or when you register for the test. And the rest of the registration package, which is essentially your resume, as well as your essay, will all be forwarded to a room in Washington that is full of my colleagues, fellow diplomats, active duty foreign service officers who read through the full package of every single person who passes the FSOT. So this is as you can imagine, a very labor-intensive task, and it's something that we do with a lot of care and attention, because this is our chance to decide who we want to meet in person, who we want to invite to come to Washington to take the oral assessment. So as I said, you'll get that immediate feedback about the multiple choice. Most people hear within an hour or two of leaving the testing center that they've passed or not, but hopefully that you've passed. It will take another 8 to 10 weeks before you hear anything back from the QEP. And you will not have to take any additional action. You've already done everything you need to do when you walk out of that testing center for the QEP. So for you, this is a passive process, but it's something you'll have to wait to hear the results of. You will have done the best you can for your candidacy by really focusing on your writing. The qualifications evaluation panel is a significant portion of our assessment, and a lot of candidates don't make it through this stage. So you want to make sure you take the care and attention on those writing samples so that you have the best chance of being invited to the oral assessment. Okay, we'll go to questions. I am going to close back out of that and take a quick look at the questions. Or Jesse, did you want to moderate this? I want to make sure we cover as many questions as possible.
Sure, I'm happy to hop on and read some of the questions that we've got out. So to start us off, we've got a question from Arthur Niemoller. Which of the 5 cones employs the greatest number of FSOs, and which are selected the least by applicants? In other words, for which cone would an applicant have the best odds of being offered an initial job?
Okay, that's a great question and a really common one. So thank you, Arthur, for that. Couple things to know. So we have those 5 career tracks, and when you select them and you go all the way through that process, you end up on that candidate register. So you'll remember the slide with the bubbles, and the last bubble was the career candidate register. We actually have 5 of those. So there's one for each of the career tracks, which is why this question is phrased the way it is, right? So which of the career tracks do you have the best chance of being hired from? There are a couple different components of answering this completely, so I hope you'll bear with me. The first thing to know is that all of our candidates pass the same assessment at the same level. So once you get to the oral assessment and you're given your final scores there, you'll see that we give each candidate a score between 1 and 7, with 7 being perfect, a perfect score. And in order to pass through and get onto the candidate register, get that career conditional offer, you need to have at least a 5.25 on that 7-point scale. And that's regardless of which of the career tracks that you have selected. So it does not matter which cone you choose, you have to get that 5.25 score at the end of the oral assessment day in order to receive the conditional job offer. And everyone who gets that score gets that conditional job offer. Now, how does that translate to who's actually hired and when? That's where the nuance starts to come in. So when we hire, when we are putting together a new orientation class, of candidates off of that register. Our human resources team looks at the workforce, determines how many new diplomats we need in each cone. So let's say we're having an orientation class starting in May. Human resources may say, okay, for this class we need 15 new management officers, 7 new consular officers, 12 new political officers, and so on. The way that our process works essentially is we start offering positions on each register to the people who are closest to 7. They're going to be the first people to get an offer, and then we work our way down until we fill those slots with acceptances. So that's the process. So regardless of which cone you have, the closer you can get to 7, the faster you'll be offered a position in an orientation class. For candidates who are put on our register, our registrar office, our human resources office in Washington does provide some feedback. You're not in a black hole in this process. So you'll get an email periodically, I think they're doing this quarterly, that will tell you whereabouts you are on the list. And I believe they divide that by thirds. So they'll tell you that you're in the top third on your register, or in the middle third, or the bottom third. And that will give you an idea of how close you are to receiving an offer. There are a couple of ways you can accelerate your score. And so those specifically are qualifying military service. If you are a veteran and you have 5 or 10 preference points, then you may be able to apply those to additional points and boost your score in the hiring process, which means you'll get hired more quickly. And the other way is through qualifying language skills. So we have a list of a couple dozen foreign languages where we need additional fluency in our foreign service. And you can find that list on careers.state.gov. If you have trouble finding it, you can shoot me an email and I'll be happy to send it to you. But if you speak any of the languages on that list fluently, we can give you additional points on the list, and potentially even a little extra money when we hire you for the skill that you're bringing in. But all of those points are added after you meet our minimum qualification. So I hope that that's helpful, that everybody has to get through that score. The core question that Arthur asked had to do with competition, right? Where's the greatest competition? And that's a challenging question to answer, because these lists are really dynamic and they come and they go. And there are some career registers which will be shorter now and they might be longer next year. So there isn't really a perennial favorite, if that makes sense. What you want to do is pick the cone that is going to be the best for you as a diplomat, because again, it is quite challenging to change your career track midstream. You don't want to make a selection based on how quickly you might be able to get hired. You really want to make sure you're prepared and bring your best self into the assessment process, and that's going to get you high up on that register and then offer in an orientation class.
Great. We've got a few questions from Daniel and Brooke regarding family life in the Foreign Service.
Oh, great.
So, can a married couple apply and serve in the Foreign Service together, and what kind of support exists for family life and trailing spouses?
Okay, super question. And that is a big yes. And there are lots and lots of examples of detail of how that works, but we have a term for it, tandem couples. So if you and your spouse are both in the Foreign Service, you are considered a tandem. We have lots of special structures to support our tandems, and there are many of them in the Foreign Service, including tools that will help you identify, let's say, an embassy where there might be a job available for both of you. Lots and lots of examples. A couple things to consider. One is you can take the Foreign Service Officer test at the same time, and hopefully you'll both fly through and be offered a job in the same orientation class. But quite often the timelines don't necessarily match up exactly. I would encourage you not to be discouraged by that, but continue through with the process. So one of you might be offered a position before the other. One of you might be offered a position in an actual place in an orientation class before the other. Don't let that put you off the process of applying. The State Department does a lot to try and support tandems. So for example, I can think of a number of cases that I'm personally familiar with where one officer will start in their orientation class and receive their first assignment, and maybe their significant other is just a class or two behind them. Maybe they're a couple of years behind them, but our Human Resources Office does work to try to make sure that those assignments match up. Tandem couples do have to put in legwork to make those joint assignments happen. There isn't a guarantee that we'll hold back, 20% of our assignments for couples. Each Foreign Service Officer has to secure their own assignments based on their merit. So you have to have a lot of flexibility in where you're willing to go, and you have to have a great reputation that you're bringing into those bidding cycles where you're looking for your next assignment so that you and your spouse can be assigned together. There are also lots of workplace flexibilities. So we offer leave without pay to our tenured Foreign Service Officers, and a lot of tandem couples do exercise this flexibility. So let's say one of you gets the dream assignment somewhere you really wanted to go, but there's not a job coming open there for a year or maybe for the entire assignment for the other spouse. That second spouse can choose a couple different things. One is to take leave without pay and to go and not work for a couple of years, to be together in that posted assignment. The other option is that the spouse can look for a separated assignment to go to a different country for a period of time. And there are lots of different ways to make that work. I've seen people be really creative. So there are various mechanisms, but I'd be happy to have an in-depth conversation with you offline about your particular circumstances and what you want to do. The last little thing about tandem couples in the Foreign Service, you want to consider nepotism, because obviously we take nepotism restrictions really seriously. And so if you're both starting at the same time, you'll want to consider whether you want to have the same career track or choose other career tracks, because you don't want to get into a position where you're midway up through your career or at the senior level where one of you would only be able to supervise the other one, because we obviously won't be able to approve that. And that is going to complicate things. So oftentimes the most successful tandem couples have selected different career tracks so that they're not as likely to have a nepotism conflict when they're serving together at the same embassy.
All right. What are the citizenship requirements to be a Foreign Service Officer?
Yeah, so all of our Foreign Service Officers have got to be U.S. citizens because they have to be eligible for a U.S. security clearance at the top secret level. So if you are not a citizen yet, but that's something that's in your future, a citizen is a citizen. There is no degree of citizenship. The minute you have your naturalization papers, you are eligible to apply. And there are lots of Foreign Service Officers who are naturalized American citizens or who have dual nationality. So I get that question a lot from people who have 2 or more passports. They want to know if that is a disqualifier for them. It is not. It is something that our security office will look at the way they look at anyone's international ties. And if they need to follow up with further questions, they will do that individually. But it is not a barrier to employment to be a dual national or a naturalized citizen. You do have to be a U.S. citizen to apply for our positions.
Along those same lines, what is too old to start a career in the Foreign Service, yet still have enough length of service to thrive and advance in their chosen career path?
That's a great question. I'm so glad. I'm not sure who asked that, but thank you for that question. So the Foreign Service is a really diverse place to work. I talked very briefly about this when I was talking about management officers and our diverse staffs at embassies overseas. But we value diversity in lots of different ways, including in our own American Foreign Service personnel. And that includes a range of ages of new employees. So we very intentionally invite Americans from the ages of 20 to 59 to take the Foreign Service Officer test. And that's because anyone taking the test at any one of those ages or anywhere in between can have a successful career. We have a statutory retirement age in the Foreign Service of 65. So you have to retire when you turn 65, and that's the only reason we have a cutoff at 59, because somebody did the math and said that if you take the test at 59, let's say we hire you by the time you're 60, that gives you the opportunity to be a tenured and pension eligible FSO by the time you hit retirement at 65. But there is no, other than that, there is no restriction, and we welcome folks to apply. Some of our other job opportunities, in particular our Consular Fellows Program, which is a job program. It's not a career appointment, but a 5-year contract type arrangement for people to come out and serve as consular officers for 5 years at a time. For that program, you have to have a language fluency to apply, either Spanish, Mandarin, Portuguese, or Arabic. So if you're a speaker of one of those languages, we don't have an upper age limit on that program. And in fact, last month or the month before, we brought in somebody who was, I think, 70 and a half into that program. And I wasn't able to meet the person from here in North Carolina when she came into her orientation, but I wish I had had that opportunity, because I just think there's hope for me yet. So there are some other opportunities where that statutory rate requirement is not in place, but for the Foreign Service, because of our requirement age at 65, we do cap the FSO-T age at 59.
Right, we've got a couple questions regarding school. So is it better to take the FSO-T before or after graduating? And will advanced degrees make me more competitive?
Great questions. When you take the FSO-T is a really personal question. And for me, the most important driver of that is, are you ready to pass it? And you can tell that by doing well on practice testing and knowing that you're going to be able to write those essays in a compelling way. If you have good results on those things, my view is that, and you know that this is the career you want to do, my view is that there's no reason not to go ahead and take the FSO-T. You can take the FSO-T every 12 months from the time you're 20 until the time you're 59. And we do not penalize people for taking the test multiple times. In fact, most of our new diplomats anecdotally report to us that they've taken the test more than once. So there's value in being in that system, but there's value in having experience in the testing process. And so if you've done well and you have a reasonable expectation that you'll pass at least the multiple choice part of the test, being in the system is a good thing. Getting experience in it is a good thing. So I always really caution, especially for students who are trying to time this and work backwards from what they want as a start date. I caution against that, because it's very difficult to time our system. I mean, look at right now with coronavirus, we've had to make some real adjustments to a bunch of different components of our schedule in a way that we could not have predicted. So if you are trying to time the FSO-T in order to get hired when you graduate, you're going to cause yourself unnecessary heartache. Be in that process. If you are offered that career conditional appointment, you will be asked to fill out some paperwork for that medical and security clearance. That process is also really difficult for us to time. There are some people who are quick to clear. I think I was one of these people. I was 21 when I was offered my position, 22 when I was actually hired. I had not traveled extensively abroad. It did not take long for diplomatic security to clear me at that time. But there were people in my orientation class who were in their third career. They had lived all over the world, had extensive networks of contacts everywhere. They were a more kind of labor-intensive clearance for our diplomatic security folks, and that can take months. Hard to guess how long that will take. Once you get your career offer and you go onto our candidate list, you can stay on that register for 18 months. Which is a long period of time for you to be offered a space in a class. And again, you can't predict where other people are going to fall relative to you on that list. You know what your score is. So let's say you got a 6, which is a great score, but you have no idea how many people are going to test above 6 or how many people are going to test below 6. So trying to figure all that out at the date that you're registering for the test is just not going to be a successful strategy. Instead, be in the process. When the offer comes forward, take it. I have never met a Foreign Service officer who had a hard time disentangling themselves from whatever it was they were doing before they left the Foreign Service. My own personal example, I had been working not long at a great newspaper in North Carolina, the Durham Herald-Sun, and when I went to them to say I'd been offered a position as a Foreign Service officer, they were thrilled for me to take that opportunity. And I know that they told my successors, oh, well, Kathryn left to go be a diplomat. So, they were able to be a springboard for me into that next step. And that was a recruiting tool for them afterwards. And lots of employers are that way. So don't try and time it too much. The second part of your question was about a graduate degree. And again, it's really important not to do things just for the sake of this process. We hire you not for where you went to school, not for what your GPA was, not for the particular job that you had before the Foreign Service. We hire you because you have shown us through our assessment process that you have the characteristics that successful diplomats have. So we don't have any educational requirements for people who sign up to take the test. The only requirement to take our test is that you are an American citizen between the ages of 20 and 59. That's by design. Now, in practice, through our assessment process, or through self-selection, I don't know, a vast majority of our new hires do have at least a bachelor's degree, a very, very significant majority. And there is a plurality of candidates over the last 10 years or so who do have degrees beyond the bachelor level, so master's, PhD, postdoc. But it's not a vast majority. We're talking, 51, 54%, depending on the particular class or the year. So is it advantageous to continue your education? Well, it's not going to hurt you, but it's not a requirement. The number of people who have a PhD or a postdoc in the Foreign Service is lower, considerably lower. So when candidates are asking, should I go get my master's before I take the test, or should I go get my master's in order to be more competitive? I always say, this is a really personal decision. Don't go and get your master's because you think it will help you in the Foreign Service. Get it because you want it. You have a program and a school that you are really interested in participating in. And if that helps you develop the skills and the traits and the dimensions that make a successful diplomat, then that's great. But you don't want to do it just for this process, and it isn't required.
All right, I got a quick question for you. Is there a fee to take the test?
Oh, great question. So no, but we will ask for your credit cards. The answer is no, it's free to take the test, but it does cost the taxpayer a significant amount of money to administer the test. And so the caveat here is, if you register for the test, show up and take it, or cancel at least 48 hours in advance. If you're a no-show, we will charge your credit card the amount of money that it costs us to administer the test. We're only willing to ask taxpayers to eat the cost for people who actually come out and take the exam. If you are a no-show, you'll be charged, I want to say it's $72. So make sure you turn up or cancel within the allotted time, and it'll be free.
All right, we've got a question from Walid Khalid Alpour. How significantly have cuts to the State Department affected hiring of FSOs?
That's a great question. We are hiring, most definitely, including right now in the middle of a pandemic. We are just in the process of bringing on board more than 100 people. And we hoped to be, although I don't know if we'll actually hit this with the pandemic, we should be very close, to have more members of the Foreign Service on payroll at the end of this year than we have ever had in the history. So it's a good time to be applying for the Foreign Service. And for our other Foreign Service opportunities, right? Not just the officer process, but our specialist opportunities, our Consular Fellows program, which also has really ambitious hiring targets. All of this is subject to congressional funding and to leadership. We, for those of you who've been following this for a while, you'll know that we had a hiring freeze at the beginning of all through 2017. We did not hire new employees during that time, but we are hiring aggressively right now. So I hope that answers that.
So you are a Foreign Service officer living in the United States. A question from Diamond Stout: do all the career tracks have the ability to station their employees in America and internationally?
Yes, is the short answer. So every career is very unique, and your career will be what you make it. But on average, and this is a gross generalization, FSOs in all career tracks will spend at least 50% of their careers overseas. The rules kind of are that you have to, if you come back to Washington, for example, you have to go back out and overseas every 6 to 8 years. Some people, I joined the Foreign Service to see the world. I have spent much more than 50% of my career overseas. And there are other people who really love being part of the Washington process, and they've spent more of their careers domestically. There's no right or wrong answer to how you formulate your career. we want you to have diverse experiences overseas and abroad. As a diplomat in residence, I'm based here in North Carolina. That's more unusual. We have, as foreign service generalists, we don't have a lot of opportunities outside of the Washington area, just a couple of diplomats in residence. There's a regional office down in Miami and a budget office in Charleston, South Carolina. So for management officers, there are some positions in those places. And then we also have people who go and do excursion tours out of the department as part of their State Department career. So that could be for a graduate degree. We have a couple of university opportunities for people at the mid-career level to come back to the US and go get a master's at State Department expense. We have opportunities for people to serve as policy advisors to various military commands, fellowship programs, again, and institutions of higher learning. So there are things like that that people can do domestically as well. We have a sabbatical program that a lot of officers will take advantage of at that mid-career level to come back to the States and do something totally different from State Department or diplomatic work for a little while. So there are opportunities to be at headquarters, which everyone participates in, and then there are these other opportunities around the United States, which are rare, but they're out there.
All right, so we've got a question that I think might be regarding the Wrangell Fellowship or a Pickering Fellowship, but is it true you do not have to take the FSOT if you graduate from Howard University?
No, that is not true. That's a great question. But I agree with you, Jesse, that probably is sort of a garble from some of our fellowships. And so I'm not sure who asked that question, but please feel free to email me if you want to follow up. We do offer a couple of graduate fellowship programs for recent graduates or graduating seniors at the undergraduate level, and they're called the Pickering Fellowship and the Wrangell Fellowship. Those programs will pay for a master's degree for successful fellows. They pay for a couple of internships, and then we bring people who have finished their degrees on as foreign service officers at the conclusion of their fellowship. And for those individuals alone, folks don't have to take the FSOT. Right? So they'll still have to go through the oral assessments. There are lots of other components that they still have to get their security clearances, all of those things. But the FSOT itself is waived for our fellows. Howard University is the grantee that administers those programs for us. So Howard, there are people who sit at Howard, who work for Howard, who help select the Pickering and Wrangell Fellows and help to manage that program for us every year. But all of the candidates, they're from all over the United States, and their selection has nothing to do with whether or not they went to Howard.
All right, so we've got a couple questions about people's like personal testing situations, and I think you were welcome to follow up with Kathryn specifically if you have very detailed questions you'd like input on, but just a couple of those. So if we participated in the in-person interview, but did not earn a score sufficient to be on the register and decided to reapply, can we submit the same QEP essay?
You can. So you want to make sure that if you've changed your career track, that your QEP responses from the first time still make sense. But if you're selecting the same career track and reapplying, you can resubmit the same QEP narratives as you did before. The good news is, because you made it all the way to the oral assessment the last time, you know those QEP narratives have been successful for you in the past. But it's worth taking a look at them, making sure that you don't have anything that's more compelling to include. But yes, you absolutely can recycle those, and lots of people do that. On the flip side of that, if you made it past the FSOT but not the QEP before, then you need to rework your essays. If you didn't make it as far as the oral assessment, you need to really rework those essays.
All right, so another anonymous question here. I was offered a conditional offer for an internship with State Department, and unfortunately the State Department has canceled their internships. Do you have advice on applying next year and what I can do to make myself competitive when I apply again?
Oh my goodness. So I'm so sorry this happened. For those of you who want to sort of join in our commiseration for whoever asked the question, because of the pandemic, the entire State Department is essentially remote working along with the rest of America right now, and it wasn't possible for us to bring people to Washington under the circumstances, certainly not into our facilities where we're not even working. I'm working out of the guest bedroom in my house right now. So that does not soften the sting for you, because I know you waited for a long period of time to get that internship, and I really feel for you and the other interns who've been affected. A couple of things that you should consider. One, there is a virtual internship program that is definitely going to go forward next academic year, no matter what. And I would really encourage you to consider adding that to your repertoire this coming academic year. We call it the Virtual Student Federal Service, VSFS. And you can email me about it. I'd be happy to respond back to you. But it's it is what it sounds like. It is a virtual internship, part-time. You can work it around your other campus obligations, usually about 10 hours a week, working either for an office in Washington or an embassy overseas. People apply for VSFS in the summer. The application window is between the 1st and 31st of July. And there are opportunities at the State Department and lots of other federal agencies across the government. So cool things to do. It's worth taking a look at the range of options that are out there. We hope you pick the State Department. And then you apply for that in July. We select candidates usually in August or the very beginning of September, and then your internship will run throughout the academic year. So you can get real experience with the State Department virtually for that program. In terms of in-person internships, we are planning to right now to advertise for the spring 2021 internship cycle in the coming weeks. So keep an eye out for that. Hopefully we will be able to move forward with those. And then the summer 2021 internships, if we're able to offer those, we would be advertising as usual in September. So it's worth keeping an eye on it.
All right, we've got a question from Veronica Divis. Can you earn extra points if you have qualifying language skills in 2 separate languages?
Oh yes, absolutely. Yes, most definitely. And there are people who I'm not one of them. I speak a couple of foreign languages, but I really had to work hard. But there are some of my colleagues who have lots of languages, and if you're one of those people, we want those skills. We will give you the additional points for every language that's on our critical list that you qualify in. So you can absolutely stack those.
And another question from Veronica. How long is a typical tour for an overseas assignment?
Great question. It depends on the type of living circumstances at a post. So if it is a post that is considered a hardship assignment, and we define hardship very broadly in the Foreign Service, that could be everything from, you know, the water isn't safe for you to drink straight out of the tap at your post of assignment, or maybe the air is more polluted. Everything's relative to Washington, D.C. We compare Washington as sort of the home base for Foreign Service officers. So if the air is more polluted, if the traffic is a lot worse, if it's isolated, right? So Iceland is a hardship assignment for us for that reason. If there is more crime or other risk, we assign hardship or danger essential differentials to every post that has any of those qualifying conditions. Maybe the medical care isn't up to the same standard as Washington. So we do a couple different things to compensate people for hardship assignments. We pay you more. Your housing will be bigger in some of these places. There are lots of different approaches we take to make sure that the service is appropriately compensated in a hardship assignment. Also, at a certain level, hardship tours are shorter. So a standard tour of duty at a place with no hardship is 3 years long. There are places that have a higher hardship where we have a 2-year standard tour of duty. And then people who want to stay more than 2 years at those places can choose to do so for extra incentives. And then for a smaller number of assignments where there is an active risk of danger, and these are places where there are active conflict zones, for example, the standard tour of duty is 12 months. So it really depends on the circumstances in that post of assignment, but between 1 and 3 years. In Washington, all of our assignments are 2 years. And in most of these tours, you have the option to extend for 1 additional year, with the exception of the 3-year assignments. If you're already at that 3-year assignment level, you cannot extend for a 4th year.
All right, we've got a question from Sharada. How is it determined where in the world you get posted?
Great question. It's a very interactive process. So a lot of people come into the Foreign Service or have interest because they grew up in a military family, for example, where we operate quite differently from the way the military does things. We have what we call a bidding system. So there's a little Foreign Service slang for you, but the bid cycle happens a couple times a year, and most of us bid about a year before our tour is scheduled to end. So let's say you're in a 3-year assignment, you've been there for 2 years, it's time for you to bid. You know you're going to be moving a year from now. So there will be a list that's published of all of the jobs that are available all over the world, in Washington and overseas, in all the different career tracks, and you have to look through those and create a short list of jobs that you want to go to. The first 2 overseas assignments in your career, right at the beginning of your career, you're doing this in a compressed way. So you won't see every available job. You'll see a short list of jobs, and then your subset will be longer. So I'll give you some concrete examples. Your first 2 tours, you might get a list of 100 options, and you might be asked to shortlist 20 of them. And then you'll send your short list of 20 jobs, places you would like to go and serve, back into our human resources office. And in those first 2 assignments only, they will give you your assignment. So they will tell you then which of those 20 assignments will be yours. And there are very specific reasons for that, having to do with, we want you to have a diversity of experience early in your career. So for example, we want you to do maybe 2 different types of work, maybe some consular work and some political work, or consular work and management work. We want you to show that you can be successful in both of those types of work. We want you to show that you can be successful in learning a foreign language if you don't already speak one. So maybe we'll send you somewhere where you've got to use a foreign language in your daily responsibilities. We might send you to one place that's considered a hardship assignment and one that isn't. One place that's a big embassy or consulate and one that's quite small. And we want you to have that diversity of experience early on, because by the time that you're finished with your second tour, you will have been reviewed for tenure in the Foreign Service. A lot like academia, in the Foreign Service, you can be tenured, at which point you're welcome to serve until retirement. And that's a huge investment of the United States in your talent. So we want you to show that you can function well in a variety of different environments in those first 2 assignments. After you're tenured, then that list just opens right up, and you see every vacancy across every career track. And instead of submitting a short list of 20 places, you have to submit a minimum of 5. And in that process, you're much more involved in actually securing the job you want. So you will contact the person who's currently doing the job you want, and you'll ask them what it's like. You will interview with maybe the ambassador or the director of the office in which you'd be working. You'll have your references call their decision makers and tell them that you're the greatest Foreign Service officer ever hired by the Department of State and why. And you will hope that they want you as much as you want to go to that post or that office. And when those matches are made, that's where you go. So once you have tenure, it's a very interactive process. You are very much in the driver's seat on where you go. We technically, in the regulations, have the ability to direct assignments. We have not used that for Foreign Service officers since the Vietnam conflict era. So for all intents and purposes, we are a fully volunteer force and have been for generations now. And that includes all of the post 9/11 work that we've done all over the world. So you really do get to choose where you go, and there's no, as I said, no right or wrong answer in how you craft your career. So you get people who want to spend their whole careers in South America, they're Spanish speakers, they want to use that skill, they're interested in that part of the world. You get people who want to follow the headlines, so they might be working on North Korea non-proliferation issues for one tour, they might be working on the Middle East conflict for one tour, they might be working on Venezuela the next tour. Early in my career, I worked for someone whose career mantra was that he wanted to be within 20 minutes of a beach at all times, and he made it all the way to the rank of minister counselor, which is equivalent to a 2-star general in the military. So a very successful career with a very personal motive behind his bidding. There's no right or wrong answer. It's what you want your career to be. And because of that ability, people tend to just sort of disperse themselves out over those opportunities pretty evenly, and you'll find that you'll only be competing against a couple of folks for most of the jobs you want to go for. It is worldwide availability though, so you will not be spending your whole career in one place. If you join the Foreign Service because you want to be in Cape Town, and only Cape Town for the next 30 years, this is not the right career for you.
All right, so we'll wrap it up with 2 final questions. So do you have any statistics on the % of applicants who sit for the test versus who are given a formal offer and a posting? And what has been your favorite experience as a Foreign Service officer?
Oh, okay. All right. Those are great final questions. And please, let me just say, these aren't really final questions. You are invited and encouraged to reach out to me, but for the purposes of today's session. Let's see. Wait, what was the first one, Jesse? I've already lost my train of thought. The second.
So out of how many people who take the original test end up as a Foreign Service officer?
Okay. All right. So I love the second question. I don't love this question because statistics can often be intimidating for people, and I don't want them to be intimidating for you if this is the job that you want. We get a lot of people who take the Foreign Service Officer test every year. Thousands and thousands of candidates sign up and register and sit the test, which is wonderful. I mean, I think that speaks to the dynamism of both the career, the opportunity that's there, and also how many people are interested in public service. So I'm thrilled that we have such interest in the Foreign Service Officer test. We hire a few hundred candidates a year. So from the place of taking the test to the place of being on the payroll, it's a very small percentage. And it varies depending on the year. We have had, in fact, I just saw these statistics last week or the week before, a chart of the economy. You know, as the economy goes up and down, the numbers of test takers almost exactly track the economy. So when the economy is great and there are lots of private sector jobs out there, we tend to get fewer people applying for the Foreign Service. When the economy is struggling, we tend to get more. But we always have a lot of people coming in, and we hire a small percentage of those overall. But don't let the competition rule you out. You know, look at yourself as everyone else's competition. You are just as qualified for this job as anyone else, regardless of what your background is or your experience. You do not have to have, you know, a PhD in 5 different areas in order to be competitive for this job. If you look around your network and you are the peacemaker, you are the problem solver, you are the sort of natural leader when there's a rudderless group and you say, okay, you know, I'm going to take charge and we'll figure out how to go forward. These are the if you know that about yourself, these are the kinds of characteristics that make strong diplomats. You need to be everyone else's competition. Don't worry about the other people who are in the process. And then the second question, favorite experience in the Foreign Service. That is so difficult because there have been so many and in different ways and shapes and forms. You know, I've had these extraordinary experiences that I could never have had without the Foreign Service, that have to do with things like helping to bring back 4 American citizens who were held hostage in Pakistan and Afghanistan by the Haqqani Network, which is a Taliban-linked terrorist organization, for about 5 years. I mean, I still get goosebumps thinking about it. It was extraordinary, an extraordinary thing to be a part of, and you could never ever do that in any other type of work. And there are lots of examples like that. And then there are the moments when you get to support the President of the United States, when the President is, or the Secretary of State, when they are visiting your post of assignment, by helping to lead their visit, and to be at the airport when Air Force One lands and the President gets off the plane is an incredible feeling. It will sound corny, but I get very emotional when you're stationed overseas and you see that plane land with the United States of America written along the side. You just can't help but feel proud. I have had moments repeatedly as a public diplomacy officer in every post of assignment where I've met people, often young people, who think they know a lot about the United States because they listen to pop music and watch action movies, and we send them on exchange programs and they come back with a very different and always better view of the United States than the view they left with, and that is a testament to the power of what we do, in ways, again, that are incredibly moving. We had, when I was in Pakistan, we had actually a very tragic thing that happened. There was a school shooting in Texas, and a Pakistani high school exchange student who was in Texas was shot and killed as part of a mass event that happened. And it became a huge headline news in Pakistan for a couple of weeks, actually. She was 17 years old and had the whole world in front of her. And her parents, not only on the phone to us, but then they went out and told the public, told the press, they said, this was the thing that made us proudest, that she went to America, and that she was chasing her dream, and she would not have wanted to be anywhere else but in, you know, a small town in Texas. And she has sisters, and we hope her sisters choose to go on the same kind of exchange. I mean, that level of impact in a community and to be a part of it in some small way. I would never want the kind of tragedy that family had to go through to express those emotions, but every family that benefits from one of our exchange programs has reflected that same kind of change to me. So there's that. And then there are some fun moments too, you know, as a consular officer, you get to interview the celebrities at the visa line, and we don't talk about those things, but it's fun. And so you have all these opportunities to just do incredible things for your country, experiences personally that you'd never get to have. And now, as a parent of 2 elementary school age children, I have the personal, I guess, gratification of being able to share the world with them and help them see the positive things that American leadership can do around the world. So, long answer. That's a subject for another discussion maybe, but it is an incredibly rewarding career and something that will change every aspect of your life for the better. So I hope to see you in the halls of Maine State sometime soon, and I hope this was helpful.
Well, Kathryn, thank you so much for taking the time out and sharing that information with us. It sounds like we have a lot of interest from our Magellan Society and World Affairs Council members. Shoot us an email. We're looking into putting together a study group, so if you want to be a part of that, definitely let us know. We'll be putting together some resources as well. Thank you all for participating today. This video will be recorded and sent out. You can find it on our website, social media, and make sure that you're signed up for our email updates. And hopefully we will see you soon. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.